Netflix told us the story, but was it the whole truth? The Taylor Parker case wasn't just a murder, it was a years-long deception that became a dark chapter in medical history. Today we're going beyond the documentary to decode the actual forensic evidence, because the reality is much more chilling than what the screen showed us. New Boston, Texas, sits in the far northeastern corner of the state, a landscape defined by the dense pines of the Ark-La-Tex region and the quiet, measured rhythms of small-town life. On a typical morning, the air here is heavy with the scent of damp earth and wood smoke, a stillness that suggests a community where everyone is known and safety is an unspoken guarantee. But when I began my examination of the case records from October 9, 2020, I found that this stillness was merely a thin, fragile veil covering a predatory focus that had been sharpening for months. The official archives reveal a town that would soon become the backdrop for a chilling display of calculated deception, one that forces us to confront the terrifying distance between the lives we project and the darkness we harbor. What is most haunting about the evidence is not merely the violence of the final act, but the systematic, bureaucratic commitment to a fiction, a facade maintained with such obsessive intensity that it seemed to consume the reality of everyone it touched. The woman at the center of this construction was Taylor Renee Parker, a 27-year-old who had moved through life under several identities, including Taylor Morton and Taylor Way Casey. As I reviewed the voluminous case history, a disturbing pattern emerged. A woman seemingly desperate to anchor herself to others through the fabrication of profound biological bonds. Parker had children from prior relationships, but following complications from an ectopic pregnancy and a failed tubal ligation, she had undergone a full hysterectomy. Medically and physically, she was unable to conceive. Yet, to her boyfriend, Wade Griffin, and to the unsuspecting residents of New Boston, she projected the image of a glowing, expectant mother. The case files document that she utilized a silicone baby bump to mimic the physical progression of pregnancy and harvested ultrasound images from the internet to provide tangible proof to those who might harbor doubt. She went so far as to host a gender reveal party and a meticulously staged maternity photo shoot, events designed to solidify the lie through social performance, turning her personal life into an elaborate stage play. Behind this facade of normalcy, however, lay a terrifying motive. Investigators believe Parker lived in an existential state of fear regarding abandonment, viewing a child as the only currency capable of purchasing her partner's continued presence. The transition from psychological manipulation to cold clinical preparation is documented in the digital breadcrumbs she left behind. When I analyzed the data extracted from her devices, her search history did not reflect the concerns of an expectant mother preparing for a nursery. It revealed a student of trauma. The documents demonstrate that she spent agonizing hours researching the methods of faking pregnancy symptoms and, far more chillingly, how to perform a cesarean section and deliver a viable infant preterm at 35 weeks. It becomes clear from these records that by the late summer of 2020, Parker had moved beyond mere deception. She was hunting. She identified her target in 21-year-old Reagan Michelle Simmons Hancock, a woman she had befriended while working as a local photographer. Reagan was everything Parker simulated, naturally pregnant, 35 weeks along, and filled with the genuine, radiant hope of a mother awaiting her second daughter, whom she intended to name Braxlyn Sage. The contrast between Reagan's documented, heartfelt excitement for her child's future and Parker's cold, search engine-driven methodology is perhaps one of the most mournful aspects of the entire investigation. On that October morning, the deception reached its violent conclusion. Parker arrived at the Simmons-Hancock residence while Reagan's 3-year-old daughter was present. What followed was a brutal, chaotic assault that moved through several rooms, indicating that Reagan fought with everything she possessed for her life and the life of her unborn child. When I reviewed the autopsy reports, the clinical quantification of a life extinguished, The sheer scale of the trauma was staggering. Reagan sustained 113 sharp force injuries, including 15 deep stab wounds and 98 incised wounds. Dr. Melinda Flores, the medical examiner, testified that the ferocity of the attack was such that many of the wounds reached the skeletal structure, the jugular vein severed by a single determined motion. Additionally, there were 39 blunt force injuries likely inflicted with a hammer, resulting in a broken nose and 5 separate skull fractures. In the midst of this carnage, Parker utilized a knife to perform a crude amateur extraction of the fetus from Reagan's womb. The forensic reality, as codified in the legal findings, is that Reagan was likely conscious during portions of this procedure. Her cause of death was ruled as traumatic extraction from the uterus, compounded by multiple lethal injuries. The trail of evidence then follows Parker as she fled the scene, navigating the rural roads toward Oklahoma with the infant and a ragged umbilical cord still tethered to the trauma she had inflicted. When she was stopped by a Texas state trooper in DeKalb for erratic driving, she attempted to maintain her narrative, claiming she had just delivered the baby on the roadside. I found the trooper's contemporaneous notes in the records particularly telling. He observed the blood soaking her garments and the infant on her lap, already unresponsive. Parker was transported to a hospital in Idabel, Oklahoma, where the charade reached its inevitable clinical conclusion. Hospital staff became immediately suspicious when Parker refused standard postnatal examinations, and subsequent blood tests provided the final proof of the impossible. She was not the mother, and the infant, Braxlyn Sage Hancock, had succumbed to the traumatic circumstances of her extraction. While Parker was being detained, the discovery of Reagan's body in New Boston provided the missing piece of a gruesome puzzle. The legal consequences began in Bowie County, where Parker was indicted for kidnapping and 2 counts of capital murder, one for Reagan and one for the infant, Braxlyn. During the 2022 trial, the prosecution meticulously laid out the timeline of premeditation, while the defense attempted to argue for life without parole based on claims of diminished responsibility. However, the jury required only about an hour of deliberation to reach a verdict of guilt. On November 9, 2022, following a sentencing phase that featured a gut-wrenching victim impact statement from Reagan's mother, who characterized Parker as an evil piece of flesh demon, the court delivered a sentence of death. Parker became the 7th woman on death row in Texas and the first in the state to receive the death penalty in 12 years. As I conclude this review of the archival record, the finality of the tragedy remains the most striking element. Her subsequent appeals to the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals and the U.S. Supreme Court have all been denied, leaving her to await her sentence in the isolation of the Patrick O. Daniel unit. Beyond the cold statistics of the legal system, there remains the lingering, heavy grief of a family in New Boston, represented by the civil proceedings filed by Reagan's widower and the continued, essential work of the Victim Services Division. The records end here, but the story of Reagan Simmons Hancock stands as a somber, permanent reminder of a life interrupted by a deception so absolute that it required the total destruction of another's reality to sustain itself. Even now, years later, the community of New Boston continues to process the ripples of that day. For those of us who have looked closely at the documents, the case of Taylor Parker is not just a study in criminality. It is a profound warning about what happens when the desperate human need for validation eclipses the sanctity of life. The silence of the pine trees in New Boston now carries a different weight, a reminder that the most dangerous lies are those we tell ourselves, especially when they are meant to replace a truth we cannot bear. When I reflect on the thousands of pages of transcripts, medical reports, and digital logs, it is not the pathology of the perpetrator that remains, but the vibrant, stolen future of Reagan and Braxlyn. Parker's world of curated images and silicone facades ultimately collapsed under the weight of its own unreality, yet it left behind a devastation that can never be reconciled. We are left to grapple with the haunting reality that an individual can navigate society with such a profound disconnection from humanity, and that it took the total annihilation of a mother's life for the illusion to finally shatter. The state of Texas, in its formal capacity, has closed the file on the state of Texas versus Taylor Renee Parker. But the historical record remains a testament to the fragility of truth and the devastating cost when one person chooses to rewrite the boundaries of existence at the expense of another. When we step back to view the entirety of the archival record, we are forced to confront the chilling intersection of pathological narcissism and the total failure of community observation. The documents detail how Parker moved through her social circles, weaving a tapestry of deception that was so intricate it blinded even those closest to her. Yet, within those same police reports, one finds missed opportunities, the moments where the lie might have unraveled had the truth not been so uncomfortable to perceive. What haunts me most, after months of sifting through these files, is the realization that Reagan's murder was not merely a crime against an individual, but an assault on the very concept of motherhood and shared human trust. As I close this investigation, the weight of the evidence rests not on the death sentence handed down,